Good morning, sister friends. It's Terry from Sisterhood of the Traveling Brush. It's a Furniture Painting 101, and today's topic is decor and embellishments. And part of that is like how much is too much, and there's styles where it's not too much, where it can be gaudy, where all those things, but the majority of your pieces, unless you have that particular style, sort of need to just go by regular design elements and be a little bit better than a plain piece of furniture, but a little more middle of the road than, you know, some of the cray-cray stuff. But there is a market for all of it. So, without further ado, we have paint. Paint being the very first thing that you can use to embellish your piece. And with that we talk about blending, say blending with a lighter color, you know, how they'll have a lighter color to draw attention to the center, darker colors around the edges, and blending in just lighter shades and darker shades of the same color paint that you're already using, or contrasting colors, matching colors, coordinating colors. Those are where you're not really having to add any other expense to your piece other than the paint that you were already using. And there's blending, shading, framing, color washes. And another one, sometimes, in my Mr. bottle where we have, you know, do the water to make the paint flow a little bit better when it's chalky style paint. I'll sometimes mix in a little bit of paint where I can just get the runs and not the runs. Oh my gosh, where I can get the drips. How about that? Okay, y'all. And little bits of color on there, and you can also add things like vinegar or peroxide, not at the same time, vinegar or peroxide, to your water to get a different sort of spreading effect of your paint if you're going for a more artistic finish. Okay, we have dry brushing, and that's where I usually would dry brush with a cheap chip brush, because you want it to put very little paint on your brush, dab off the excess, and barely, with a practically dry brush, go over the surface just to leave small amounts of color, and you can concentrate more on edges than in the center. And we talked about layering, and that may be where, say I wanted this to be dark green behind here, I would have put the dark green and then wet distressed once I put this color over, or dry distressed after, to where you come back and sand, and rather than sand all the way back to the bare wood, you sand back to the color that you purposely placed there underneath. And one fun thing I'm going to mention on that part that I've done on more than one occasion is paint this thing up practically like leopard splotches. Boy, I'm wacky this morning. You know, just every color that you want on there. If you're going to go with a boho themed piece, you may put teal, pink, orange. Doesn't have to make any difference at all. Then when you put your main coat over that after it dries and you sand back, the little different pops of color here and there looks really cool. That is a cool boho style finish, where it looks like you have 15 layers of paint under there, but you really have one layer of paint under there in 15 colors in different random spaces. You can paint patterns on there. That's where we think about like the buffalo check and what are they, harlequins and that kind of stuff. You can hand paint those using tape, or you can use stencils for that. You have waxes, like colored waxes, black waxes, brown waxes, gray waxes. Most of the waxes you can add, like with DIY and Dixie Belle. I can't say most, but with DIY and Dixie Belle, you can add, you know, a spoon of your paint to the wax, create your own custom color. I've made, you know, navy blue waxes, teal waxes, and different things before as well. But the waxes also come in many colors. I thought that was the DIY shipwrecked, but it is about that color. You use those to come back to add a little color to the details and to the embellishments. You can use that for aging, for adding other colors. Okay, then we have things like gilding waxes. Those are the little ones you can use a brush or your fingertip at the very end and just go over the edges or over the high tips and things like that and get a really good finish from that. Dixie Dirt, I think the Dixie Belle one comes in 3 colors: charcoal, ash, and earth. So a brown, a black, and a gray. The DIY Decrepit Dust comes in white and sort of a deep gray color. Those are really good if you would put the wax over the area that you wanted that to show more at, and then sprinkle or dab with a dry paintbrush the dirt into those crevices, and that gives it a really old world, aged, kind of dirty look, but it's fabulous. I'm probably going to do that to this piece right here, actually. Another option are glazes. And remember in the last episode, we talked about creating your own glazes by adding whatever color paint that you want to glaze with to like a clear coat satin, and that becomes a glaze, or a color wash, and that's where you would mix it with water. I like to do about 50-50, and then you paint on, wipe off the excess, and again it stays in those crevices. This is a pearlescent glaze. Dixie Belle makes several of these. This one's just called pearlescent, looks like a pearl, but they have them in teal and black and brown and gray and all the colors. Patina is another option. It's not something you would put on every piece, but to make a piece spectacular, Dixie Belle has the Patina paint in copper, iron, and steel, I think it is. And these have sprays that go with them. You paint it on. Say if you wanted this to look old and teal patinaed here, that's how you do it. I love to do the patina too. You paint the paint that has actual metal in it and let it dry. Paint on a second coat, and while it's wet, you spritz it, and a natural real patina is going to run down. So you would stipple this on exactly where you want it to look rusted, or where you want it to look at, a copper type patina or an old world look. Put that on, stipple it here and there, because you don't want it, to rust, and things like patina doesn't happen in a straight edge. You want it to look like it dripped down naturally, and that's fabulous. I love to do that on pieces, and I'll probably do it maybe once every 20 pieces or so. I'll miss it and want to try it again. There's also metallic paints. Dixie Belle has a good line of those. I think we may have talked about the mousse. This is another metallic looking element that you can add to just small areas, but you can also use these with the stamps and stuff that we'll talk about later. But I felt like making powders. These are the DIY making powders, and I would use these. One of the ways you can use these is to tint your paints, or you can add it to white, make a paint this color, or you can use it in a similar fashion that we just talked about the Decrepit Dust and the DIY, or the Dixie Dirt. So we went over that. Now we will move to texture. And on texture, that's where you add something that you can, usually you really can feel it. It doesn't just look like you can, that it has a texture. It actually has a texture. So that's the kind of texture we're going to be talking about. And that's where you can add things like glitter. People want to say for their fancy daughter's vanity, the whole top glitter. You would get the fine glitter and you paint your surface a matching color to the glitter. Go ahead and get a couple of coats of that on there. And the next two options that I'll use are put your top coat on while it's wet, sprinkle the glitter, top coat's going to dry, grab most of that glitter, and then you'd have a rough glittered surface, and you would then need to put either a resin or a couple more coats of top coat over that, and it would remain textured. Another option is mixing the glitter in with the clear coat and painting it on. And that's going to give it a little bit smoother, because that's going to get some of the edges of the glitter down into the top coat better than sprinkling it on top. However, you have to remember to stir, use as fine a glitter as you can, and stir, because you don't want a big bunch of glitter here and hardly none here. You know how glitter fingernail polish is. It can do that, and you don't want to work it to death either once it's a top coat. So stir, put on a coat. I would stir, put on another to try to fill in areas, stir, put on a third, and it's going to be textured, a little textured looking, but more smooth for a countertop or top surface. Then sea spray, and there's a couple of different companies that make this too. This one is from Dixie, and this is a paint additive, and you put a scoop of it in with your paint, stir it up real good, it thickens it up and gives it some texture. And one of the main methods of using that is you would also use a chip brush, maybe even a chopped down a little bit one to give it a little more stiffness, and you pounce it on. You pounce it on to give little mountains and valleys and things through there and tips. You wait until it's almost dry, then you come back with your sandpaper and knock a lot of those tips off. Then you paint your next color of paint over it, sand it back a little, and it's going to look like, you know, the pie safe that's been in Grandma's back room for 142 years. And that's a really cool thing to get. But you can also thicken this. You can thicken patina to give it a more textured, rusty look. You can thicken your paint for stenciling, for like raised stenciling and things like that. So that's great for thickening. And mad at myself because I don't see it this morning and I had it right there. DIY has a new product called frosting, and it comes in a little bottle about this big, and I have one right here somewhere because I'm going to use it this week. I'm excited about it. And that one you mix with the paint as well. It's a liquid. You mix say a teaspoon in with a small amount of paint, and then you give it, you know, 20 minutes to an hour or whatever to start absorbing that, and it's going to kind of puff up and gives you that cake frosting like consistency, which is beautiful for using a putty knife, which you could also use with the sea spray to get a real built up rough edge there, or use that to knock down some of the ridges. But you also could spread that frosting with it to make it heavier on some areas and lighter on others, scrape some on and off to give it that really good layered textured look. And I have a video called Chunky Smooth Finish where I did something similar just with the paint by leaving it out. And most of the chalky paints you can do this for sure with DIY, Junk Monkey, Dixie Belle, ones that I use very often. Leave the lid off or pour some on a plate, cover it up, not tightly, but to where a lot of the water will evaporate overnight, and you have a thicker paint that you can go do layers and layers with your putty knife without having to add anything to it. But this is always another option. Dixie mud or drywall compound. I use both. You can see I've used a lot of the mud out of here. Most of the time I'm going to grab the Dixie mud when I'm going to do like a raised stencil or something like that, because it's already mixed up. It's the right consistency. It dries at the amount of time that I'm usually working on something, and it's convenient, and it comes in white, black, and brown. However, I sometimes buy the big buckets at Lowe's or Home Depot, and you can buy it in powder to mix in, but because they have some that dries within an hour, some that dries within 24 hours, some that dries within 3 days or whatever. Always make sure if you're buying one of the ones at the home improvement store, those are intended for drywall, in people's houses, textured walls and things like that, but they're going to work the same as this, but the drying time varies, so you can't just go grab the first one. You really have to look at the little details on there. And another thing, I'm about to use this on this project here as well. You can tint this, so I'm using the new silk colors, Mojave and Umber. I'm going to mix both of them together a little bit with some of my mud for what I'm going to be working on here next. So that's always an option. And the last option is sand. You can actually use sand. I would recommend using, the play sand that you buy at the home store. But that is another way to get a gritty texture if that's what you're looking for. Another way to embellish or decorate your piece is just by using your tools, such as for light or heavy sanding, your sanding pads, your electric sander. We have videos on that if you're interested, for tutorials on doing it by hand or doing it with your random orbital sander. And that depends on how much distressing that you want to do. And then there's wet distressing, which is easier with some brands than others. With DIY, you can come back and wet distress a month later by just using a sponge and putting it on the same areas that you would sand, but it's going to reactivate that paint, pull it off, and look sanded and no dust in the house. You can also wet distress like the Dixie Belle and the acrylic-based ones, but you need to do it while they're still wet. So don't let it dry first, or it's a lot more difficult. And I don't ever do this because I don't do a lot of distressed pieces, but they are still extremely popular right now. So, and my mama used to do this. That's where you use little chains and wrenches and hammer ends and things like that. If you want a real distressed look, you stand back and, you know, don't overdo it. Less is more. But put actual dents and dings and distressed damage that looks like old wormholes and things like that on the piece. Other tools are stamps, and you can use your same scrapbooking, card making stamps, or there are decor stamps. Prima makes some, and I've got a buttload of them somewhere, but this is an old one. This makes it easier whenever you have the correct tools, because when you're trying to use one of these flexible ones and lay it on there and get it right and there's paint on it, it's only like 10 bucks to buy one of these things, and I definitely recommend doing it. But those are another way to get good designs on your piece. Your wood graining tool, this is, the stick's missing. Most of the time I'll just stick one of these in it or something, but that's where you would get a rock and pull to get faux wood grain on the front of your piece or on the top of your piece, however you want to do it. You can tape off part and have just part wood grain. You could have your wood grain be in red and teal. It doesn't have to look natural, or you can, you know, give it a real natural wood grain look with that. Sponges, just like the old faux wall deal, you can come back, lightly tap, don't get too much so that you fill in the crevices, offload a little bit and tap on more color. And then we come to the stuff mostly that you buy and put on, and that's where you get the spectacular statement pieces, and, you know, unless you're an artist and paint on the front of them, and that's even more spectacular to me. But this is how most of us cheat at that most of the time, by using the right tools. We have transfers. They're called rub-on transfers. Bells and Whistles makes them. This is an old one I took off my shelf. This is the boho sole, and the way that the majority of the bells and whistles line is it has a lot of individual elements on the sheet, and then you decide where you want each one to go. So if you wanted a cluster and then some feathers to come out of this corner, you're not stuck with however they put it on the paper. You can put that on there and then have all your arrows pointing this way, maybe one going around the corner, whatever you want to do. So you cut them out, and the way that I do it is cut them out, visualize my design on a piece of paper or on the furniture, use some painter's tape, stick them here and there with the backing still on it, of course, and decide where I want them, and then come back and do them one at a time. And you can layer them on top of each other. They don't have to, you know, butt up to each other or anything. But then you, when you're ready to do it, you pull the backing off. You have your piece cut out. It's sticky. It attaches to there. You use a stick that's provided with it, rub it off, and it's on there. And afterward, you put your satin top coat over it. to make sure that it stays there. Reminds me of the old Cracker Jack tattoo, but it looks like it's painted on. It looks like you did the real piece of art. It transforms a piece like nothing else that I've ever seen. That when this came into the industry, it was life-changing for furniture artists. But don't use gator hide. They don't get along very well. Always use the satin top coat. And if you want the gator hide toughness on it, say that you wanted something on the top of a vanity, you would paint it, seal it. This is what I would do. Paint it, seal it with your satin top coat, put your transfer on, seal it with your satin top coat again. Once that dries, then put your gator hide on. And nothing's going to penetrate that and get to this. But that's only if, you know, you need the extra gator hide protection there. This one is redesigned by Prima. This is another one. I hope there's pieces still in here because it's one that I use. But I wanted to show you how theirs come. And most of them lately, of course, it's never all just alike, but most of them come in, I love birds. I love this one. Most of them come in sheets that are about the size of a drawer. So they are fantastic for when you're doing, this would look good on there if I wasn't already doing something different with that. But you cut out the whole long strip and it makes you have less of a huge paper to have to deal with, because some of the original Prima ones and some of the ones that they still have now, if you're doing a whole, you know, 6-drawer double dresser and you're putting one giant flower arrangement on there that comes in one giant piece, there's a whole lot of room for error, and I have made those errors. It does happen, but there's nothing like the way that it looks in the end. It's spectacular, but this makes life so much easier. So this particular design, we would cut it right there, put one on this drawer, put one, center it wherever we want it, put it on that drawer, tape it, just like we talked about with the other one, come back, rub it on, do the same top coat stuff, and it is very, very easy to handle when it comes in the that style and shape of piece, you know, the drawer sized nearly. But the same thing, the sheets are not huge in the majority of the bells and whistles ones. They are to where you can handle it, because if you're standing here with your backing off, one little slide of wind can pull that thing to it, and there it is. When you pull it back, part of that picture is likely to stay. So you want to be careful with that and get it in bite-sized chunks for yourself. Paint Pixie makes the rub-on transfers now. I think they call them rub-on transformations. I've got one here somewhere that I'll be trying in the next few days. And there are brands that I have not tried, but that I hear a lot about. If y'all know about them, tell me about them. Hocus Pocus and A1 transfers and IOD. I have used those. There's not a whole lot of difference between all of the lines except for the actual style or the design element itself. So I don't think it's, you know, going to make that much difference as far as quality with the brands that I mentioned. I mean, I'm sure there's cheap ones that's going to not be good, but that's with everything. And the next is Decoupage. I decoupage quite a bit, and I started out doing it with napkins. If you have a store called Tuesday Morning where you live, then people have the best looking napkins of anything I've ever seen. I actually used this one on a jewelry box makeover, and it was gorgeous. But they're usually 3-ply, so when you're using your napkins, easy to pull off that 1-ply. But if you really, really look, there's another ply there too. And you want to get that off because having 2 layers for your decoupage medium to go through is going to make it more likely for this to wrinkle or rip or give a result that you don't want after you've gone to all that trouble to peel these things apart, get it straight, cut it out to size, get it on there, blah, blah, blah. Well, I can't do it during this, but just know, check your napkins, because even though it looks like you've peeled off the backing, there actually is usually another 3rd ply to that. But you would do these all in the same way. All the ones that I'm about to show you are done in the same method, but the difference in the materials is the ease of use and the brightness, I guess would be a good word for it, of the results. This is, I think they just changed the packaging on this, and I had a third one. These are all Prima paper packagings, and I want to talk about this one. They call it Mulberry Tissue, but this is the one that feels like a dryer sheet, and it having that little bit of strength to it, I guess, like the fibers that are in it and things like that. This is not like a napkin that's going to wrinkle up over here, smudge, and then you're going to try to be flattening it out, and this top's going to wrinkle, and you're never going to get it straight, then it's going to tear. This thing's strong enough to handle what you do to it with your decoupaging. So, same method as decoupaging anything else. You're going to cut it, decide, make sure it's right side up. This is upside down right now. Make sure it's right side up. Cut it to size. Use your decoupage medium of choice. We'll discuss those in a minute. Put it on here and then put another coat of decoupage medium over it. Another premium paper product are the rice papers. This is a Dixie Belle one. This is the one, if you watched the video where we redid the vases from a BFFK's living room. This is the exact one we used. And this is called rice paper. Prima also, one of the Prima ones there is also a rice paper. But this has fibers going through it. There, you can see them, I think. It has a little bit of texture to it. And these bright colors are still going to shine through, because when you add the decoupage medium to the napkin, it's going to dull it a little bit. But when you add it to the papers that are actually not absorbing the medium as much, but staying on the surface, being held there by the medium, they have more of an opportunity to maintain their brightness. And once again, you would traditionally wet your surface with your decoupage medium, put your cutout piece on there, get it exactly how you want it, and then go over it again with the decoupage medium after to hold it there. I do have a video on dry decoupaging if you're interested in that. And that's where you put a coat of your clear coat satin, Mod Podge, whatever you're using, on your piece. Let it completely dry. Cut out your paper, any of these, or wrapping paper. Tuesday morning is a great place to get wrapping paper too. And you put it on, and you use your iron on medium, maybe 300 or whatever, not as hot as cotton, but down a notch from there. You can use parchment paper over it if you want to. I'm generally lazy. Most of the time I don't, but if you want to, be sure that your iron's not too hot, use that over it, and you just iron it on. And what that heat does is reactivate the decoupage medium that you used under there, and sucks your paper down to it, and adheres it. And then once you've done that, you put your other coat over it, just like you do with anything else. But you don't have the sliding around and repositioning issues that you do have whenever you're doing it wet. But most of that would be fantastic with napkins. Most of that's alleviated because of the strength of the rice papers. The rice papers and the mulberry papers. And I mentioned a while back, we're Sister to the Traveling Brush. We're in talks with a company to design some for us, so I'll be excited when those come out. So we discussed rice paper by Bells and Whistles and Prima, the mulberry paper, and other brands that I've heard fantastic things about but have not tried are Grace on Design and Bubblegum Yum, and then the Sister to the Traveling Brush. I'm going to be thrilled with that one because we're not going to bring it to market if I'm not, and I feel real good about it, working with a local lady here that does that. Wrapping paper, napkins, photographs, internet free photo galleries, and if you're wanting a big piece, you can go to a print store, sometimes even the library, or a place where they print blueprints and stuff like that, and they will print out the big piece for you so that you don't have to be pasting a bunch of individual 8.5 by 11s on there. And you can also use the decoupage medium to transfer the design off of the paper onto your piece rather than decoupaging the piece onto the actual leaving the paper on there. You can just transfer with your decoupage medium, and you would do that by applying it with the wet method. Put your Mod Podge or your satin top coat on there, put your paper on there, let it dry, come back with a rag and wipe the paper away, and the design stays. So that's another real nice looking one. But make sure that it, that you're not stealing somebody's picture, that it's in a free gallery or it's a place where you paid for that design or you created it yourself. Because you can always create something in Procreate online or draw something on a piece of paper and then go have it blown up and have your own design applied that way instead of having to freehand it. Decoupage mediums, the one I use the most is the Dixie Belle Clear Coat Satin. I use DIY Big Top. I have all of these sitting here somewhere, but I guess you don't need me to hold it up. Or liquid patina or Mod Podge. And Mod Podge has, well, as like Dixie Belle does too, they have the shiny ones, the glossy ones, the flat ones, the matte ones, the tinted ones, the dark and decrepit by DIY is great for that. So any of those mediums are going to work to get it on there in the dry or wet method. The next option would be stencils. And where did I put the stencils? The Dixie Bells and Whistles by Dixie Belle makes this huge size that makes it great for, like, I would be able to get this entire drawer front done with one stencil and then move it here and then move it here. I would probably I would start here in the middle if I was going to do this. I would start in the middle and then come back and do each side so it would be equaled out. But not having to use the smaller ones and match it up here, then match it up here, then match it up here, then match it up there. Makes life easier, but costs twice as much money. So depends on the value of your time and the design that you find that you like. But you can use this. I use these when they have the big holes like this. It's a little bit harder, but I got these at Michael's. These are some from Redesigned by Prima. I've used this on t-shirts. I've used it on a floor. I've used it on a piece of furniture. I've used it on flannels. I mean, these are thick and can be used for everything. But the furniture size ones are very nice. They're convenient. You tape them on, and either you can stencil on with your paint by making sure you have a good flat end brush, offloading any excess, and dabbing straight in. Never paint it back and forth, because if you paint it back and forth, it's going to seep between these. And my other big tip on this, if you don't do it already, is, well, I have two versions of it. One version is I would paint the base coat of the piece in the color that I was going to do the stencil, so that whenever you're putting that on, it's not going to show those edges. But if that didn't make good sense, I don't think. But another option is, let me explain that one better. If I did not want any paint to go under the edges of this stencil, I would come back right now with this color, which is Mojave, after this is taped on, and I would go all around the edges with Mojave. And what that would do would be seal up all these edges, so any paint that's going to run under there, because paint is likely to run under there, would match this, so we would never see it. Then once that dried, I would come back with the brown that I wanted to use. These edges are all sealed with the Mojave, so it's not going to seep under. And when I pull it off, it only stayed on the edges. If you don't want to do that with your base coat, you can do that with a clear top coat. Same thing, tape it on here, go with your clear coat so that seals all the edges, then come back with the color that you want to show up after that dries, and none of the color would have bled through, or very little, if it happens, would have bled through to ruin your design, because there's nothing more frustrating to me than to have to come back with a tiny paintbrush on a giant piece of furniture trying to straighten up the little lines around the edges. It's definitely worth the prep on that phase. But raised stencils is where we go back to the products that we talked about earlier, the sea spray, the mud, the DIY frosting. Rather than just come on here with another color paint and have it be a flat design, you can come in here with your putty knife. Of course, you got this taped on tight where you want it, and then you come across it, and that you need it to be thick. You can't be just one of the paper ones and get as good of results. And you come back on with your texture medium of choice and rub it on, rub it across, get it in all the areas, pull it off, and then the texture stays raised. To me, what looks good is maybe a 1/16 of an inch or something like that, which is what you'll get with most of these stencils. After that dries, I always come back and with maybe a 200 grit sandpaper, one of the little sanding pads, sand over to get it kind of smooth on there, and evenly textured across. Then I use a dry paintbrush to dust all that in between it and top coat over it. You can tint any of these. We talked about that. So with this one, I am going to be tinting with those two colors for what I'm about to do here. But the other option with this is for, and what I'm doing with this one, what my daughter's doing for me actually, thanks Candy if you're watching, is you can create your own stencil. There's Essential Stencil. I'm an affiliate for them, and I use them for my sign stencils a lot. But if you have a Silhouette or a Cricut or one of the cutting machines, you can go and get those SVG files or whatever. Get a cut file of any design that you want. This is going to have fish on it. And Candy's designing it for me. But you can buy, like I have big sheets, nearly this big. They're longer, maybe not quite as wide, that go through your cutting machine and cut out the good stencils to be reusable, and that way you can design whatever stencil you want. And the difference in the size of the lines, make sure, you know, think about where your mud's going to come through, if it's textured and those kind of things. But Candy is making that one for me, and I think I'm going to sell my Silhouette in the garage sale because she's always the one. But you can also use your vinyl, or I have a couple of rolls of Stencil Vinyl, and that's where you cut it out if you're not going to want to reuse it, or at least not want to reuse it over a time or so. That's where you use the sticky adhesive back to cut your stencil out. That way you don't, very not likely to get any of the bleeding around the edges because you got the whole dang thing stuck on there everywhere. And you paint it on because that's not going to be thick enough for your raised stencil. Pull it off afterwards and throw it away. So those are definite options for getting texture or design. I'm envisioning, like, remember the black velvet posters they used to have, and they would have the raised velvet on there and black light posters and all that. I had those in my room as a kid, and I loved them and thought they were the coolest thing ever. There were even velvety feeling wallpapers and things like that back then. Well, those are raised stencils. That's the look that you get from that. Stencils are the ones that I use the most are the Bells and Whistles, Prima. I have not used, but I imagine that they're good. Jamie Ray Vintage has a line. Essential Stencil, that's the ones I use all the time for, like, the words that I use for signs and stuff like that. And then we have wood moldings as the next option. And that's where you can think about the molding like a picture frame is made out of. You can come around each drawer with that, and like a cabinet door would look, and give a raised edge. You could put a piece through the center and do a raised center. Or this one I think was from Lowe's, or I don't know, someplace like that, because I've had these for a long time. But this is where you can take a piece from plain to just looking nice. The older pieces a lot of times will have this on there, and it looks like it's original to the piece, and all you did was just wood glue it on there. And another option, and I swear I didn't get this opened in time, I'm using these in the hobby horse project that I've been talking about. We're hopefully going to be working good on that next week. This is called Would You Bend. And Would You Bend is a company out of, I think they're out of the UK. The lady's name is Solly Joe that owns it. Really nice lady, really cool stuff. These are, they're wood. I mean, they're like a composite wood. And you can get it in long strips that look like molding that you glue on. But the cool thing about these is you take your blow dryer or heat gun or just have a empty electric skillet sitting there or whatever, heat them up. Once you heat it up, this is wood that you bend. How cool is that? Wood you bend. And so you would be able to, say, put this right here. Can you see that? And bend it around that corner. Make it look like almost like a hasp or something would be. And it's going to bend, and then you're going to put your wood glue on there, put it on there, tape it on and wait until the wood glue dries. Then you can come back with a utility knife and cut through it right there at the seam of that drawer. And this piece is going to wrap all the way around your piece, and that's an awesome embellishment that does tricks that the plain wood ones don't do. So this is called Would You Bend. I have a full line of this, and I can order it. I don't have a whole lot of it on my website, but I do have a whole lot of it that needs to be put on my website. So if you have questions about Would You Bend, just ask me, and I can show you some of the designs either I have or I can get. And I should have brought, let me see if I have one more while we're at it. I'll just grab, like I said, these, I just got these in because these are the ones I'm going to use on that rocking horse. And I will, on here, I would use wood glue. And this is wood, and the way that wood glue works is to penetrate these fibers a little bit to get in there. However, the rocking horse that I'm about to work on is plastic. So I will likely use E6000 to glue that on there. Show you one more. Their packaging is so much better than it was couple of years ago, but this is just another look. You could have this on a drawer this way, you could have it coming down this way. This one's actually going to be bent around the neck of the horse, so that's really cool. You need to think about the the end price of your piece, so you can't put $500 worth of these things on there. And I don't have these prices right now, but I'm thinking these are kind of nice. I'm thinking these are probably about 20 bucks. They come in pairs, almost all of them. This is probably 12 bucks or something like that. So it's not highly expensive, but it is going to add to the retail price of your piece in the end. Then we're going to talk the last thing, well, next to last thing is molds. And I do have videos on using these if you've not seen tutorials on them. I recently made one I think is going to be like a YouTube short using this little bird by Paint Pixie. And what these are is flexible molds. If I had not used non-food stuff on here already, you can use these for candy making and all that kind of stuff as well. But what we're talking about is taking a design. These almost look like your Would You Bend pieces. See, you would just get this, and you can make, if you had a whole set of furniture and, a dresser, 2 nightstands, an armoire, whatever, and you're wanting to embellish them all more, if you buy the mold, then you can, you can make 22 of these, and you don't have to buy 22 of these. You buy one mold, and that's reusable. And they have some really cool designs. These are some knob designs, like if you buy the regular plain wood knobs, you can still have a decorative raised area. This is where you make the molding pieces if you want it, and you just attach them next to each other, butt them up all the way across. This is fabulous. And what you can make these with, these are reusable of course, are paper clay and modeling material, pixie dough. This is the one that Paint Pixie makes, and this stuff's pretty cool. That's I'll hold those up, and I know we're running long here. But this is what it's like. You could probably get if it dries well and you try it to make sure it doesn't shrink too much, you could probably get the modeling clay at Hobby Lobby or the dollar store. But I use a good bit, so I want to keep that together. This pixie dough is awesome as well, and this one is like feels like a marshmallow. Feels like a marshmallow, and it doesn't dry. This one is going to dry hard. And the thing is, you want to be in a controlled temperature while you're waiting for it to dry, because the bigger pieces, if they're too thick, will crack. That's on like the modeling material. This pixie dough, see there, I'm like pulling off a piece like a marshmallow. This is going to take the shape of whatever I put it in. Takes a little longer to dry. You can put it in the freezer if you need to for a little while to speed up the drying. I do have this on, I believe it's on my website already, and maybe in my Etsy store. This is $12.99, and it's going to make a bunch of molds. This is as light as a marshmallow. You can paint it afterward and do all the things. So you can get any of these shapes with paper clay, modeling clay, pixie dough. Another thing that I use in here a lot is resin, like the Pourable Resin, and epoxy sculpt. I forgot to write that down. And with the resin, you mix them together, get the amazing casting resin. You pour it in flat to the top, and it turns white as it dries. You can pull it out just before it's all the way dry. If you want to try to round something with it, like we talked about with the Wood You Bend, it's not quite as good at that as the Wood You Bend is, but there's a lot more, opportunity to use it. And another thing that I do sometimes is fill them up with hot glue. Just use my hot glue gun over it, fill up all the holes. It's still going to take the shape of it, and you can still, I prime those before I paint those. But there you go. So all kinds of designs you can get with those. Prima, redesign with Prima, Paint Pixie, IOD are all brands for those that I've used. And then we're going to talk real quick about design elements, because we've talked about all the stuff that we can put on there. I want to make sure that I didn't leave anything out. I don't see that I did. Is what's it called? What's the golden ratio, as in art and photography, the rule of threes. I use the hashtag grid here to try to give that idea. And I guess I'm going to have to hold it up there to talk about it, is you don't want to put, whatever you're going to put on your piece of furniture, you don't want it right here just in the middle in the center by itself. That is not interesting to the eye, and it's not going to get as much interest as if you move it to one of these intersections. Move it over just a little bit left of center, a little bit right of center, a little bit high. If you come in the left corner with something big, make sure at least put something small in the right corner, or vice versa. So whenever you're laying out where you want your design to be and what you want your design to be, whether it's going to be all over, of course, that would be a different answer there. But if you're going to use some of the transfers, if you want a big part in the center, it's not impossible to do it, but you're going to need to come off a little bit to opposing corners, whichever they may be, even if it's just a little bit in here and a little bit in here, in order to stay with what's pleasing to the eye. That's symmetrical, the same exact size thing here and here. Asymmetrical, a big one and a little one. One pointing a little bit to the left, one pointing a little bit to the right. Or just remembering the diagonal and where it's coming from, leading to what your focal point is. So if you had this giant flower here in the middle of your piece, you would also want to think about coming in with one of your small ones, pointing in toward that piece, because this is your focal point. So you're going to put this smaller one, turn it around until you find the face of it, to where it's facing toward this center. And if you have a leaf there, put one on. It could be coming off the end. That's helping to point it in. And then you would choose another one, even smaller or equal to that one, not another big one. And it would come up from the other end, and that would tie it all in together and make it more pleasing to the eye. That's your rule of threes and your sort of your golden ratio. And that's it for the Decor and Embellishments episode. Next week we have episode 6. Is that right? Episode 6. Finishing. That's choosing your top coats and the best practices for your finishing. And we're going to talk about the different waxes, and because like the Dixie Belle wax is water-based, the DIY wax is always the last product you use because it'll create a resist. And we'll talk about the differences in the water-based poly and the oil-based polys, and when wax is enough, how often you have to re-wax, when you would choose to use hemp oil or other finishing products. I'll see you then. Thanks for joining me, and I appreciate you.